everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos, and today I have a tutorial and pattern for this crisscross corset. I actually made two versions of this corset. The first, of course, you just saw in the intro. It's this really pretty pink color. This one has boning throughout the corset. It gives it a little bit more stability, but it is a little bit more challenging to sew. But this one, which it's not laced up right now, this one does not have any boning throughout it, so it's a little bit more easy to wear, definitely easier to sew, but it just doesn't give that same effect as a corset with boning. So you can choose to opt in, opt out of the boning. Just realize it's gonna have a little bit of a different look. Personally, I'm not really sure which one I like better. I like the boning, how it kind of cinches you in and shapes you really nicely, but I love the comfort of this one. It's a little bit more casual. Anyways, if you would like the pattern for this, that is the first link down below. And you guys know I like to give those of you who are watching this video quickly a discount to the pattern. So if you use the code Criss-Cross, you will get 30% off this pattern until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. For all the supplies and materials you need, also check that first link down below. It's in the pattern's listing description. And for all the equipment I'm using throughout this video, you can check the video description, and I have links to all of that stuff. If you want to see the process of more of how I designed this and created this from scratch, go check out my TikTok. I like to post a little behind the scenes and process things there. But yeah, without further ado, let's just get into the tutorial. So of course, first we're going to print out our pattern. Make sure you are printing out at 100% scale. I like to print out on cardstock just because it makes my patterns a little bit more durable and last longer. Once you print everything out, just line up your pieces of paper edge to edge without overlapping, and then tape them together based on those lettered and numbered diamonds. Then figure out your size based upon the size chart in the instruction pamphlet and cut on the corresponding line. Now for the sewing. So first we're going to work on the shell of the corset. So first off, I just like to organize all of my corset pieces and just line everything up so I don't get them confused later on. This is something that can very easily happen when sewing up a corset and all the pieces look similar. So just line everything up like this. I promise you'll thank me. Next, I'm going to separate the corset into the right side and the left side because we're actually not going to sew down the middle or down the center back. We're going to sew everything on the right side together and everything on the left side together at those vertical seam lines. So I just like to separate again to organize so I don't accidentally sew that center front seam. Once everything is sewn, I'm just going to bring that over to my iron and press all of those seams open. Pressing all those seams open is definitely important because we're going to add boning and it's going to help reduce that bulk. Now we're going to add boning, and like I said in the intro, don't feel like you have to add boning and make this more of a corset top. If you want this to be more of a cute, comfier crop top, definitely feel free to opt out of the boning. So I wanted to show you guys a couple different boning options. This is the boning that usually comes at your local fabric store. It's the Dritz Featherlight boning that comes in a casing already, and I have various videos using this, so I'm going to link it at the top of the screen and down below if you'd like to use this boning. But today I'm going to switch it up and use Ridgeline boning, which I think is actually a little bit easier to use and cheaper. So for each vertical seam line, I'm going to cut a piece of boning that measures the length of that vertical seam line minus about 3/4 of an inch on the top and bottom. We don't want the boning going all the way to the very top or the bottom because we're gonna have to sew the top and bottom seams later on, and we don't want unnecessary bulk near those seams. Now I'm also going to finish off the boning with some end caps made specifically for Ridgeline boning. This is just so the end caps aren't spiky like that and going to poke through the clothes and hurt the clothes or you. So the boning is going to be placed in the middle of each vertical seam on the wrong side of the fabric. Remember how we pressed the seam allowance open before? That is to prep for the installation of the boning. So I'm going to bring this over to my sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. I'm going to top stitch about 3/4 of an inch from the top of the corset. Then I'm going to grab my Ridgeline boning and add it underneath, making sure it's still in the center of the seam. And I'm going to continue top stitching along that seam, making sure I catch the boning underneath. Now that the boning is installed, we can add that top piece to the corset. As you can see, mine has a seam in the middle of it. That's because I had to be a little scrappy and use some scrap fabric for this project. Of course, yours won't have that seam through that piece. So it's not going to lay nice and flat, so you're just going to have to keep that in mind and take the seam really slowly, making sure to maneuver the fabric so that it does lay flat wherever you're stitching. Once you've done that, take it over to your ironing board and press that seam upwards. I'm going to press it up towards the top of the corset. Then, just to keep everything clean and professional, I'm going to top stitch along that seam on the upper part of the seam, so about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. Now that the shell is constructed, we're going to repeat all of those steps basically for the lining, minus all of the top stitching and the boning. We're just constructing the lining and then pressing everything. Now we're going to add interfacing along the center front on all 4 pieces on the wrong side of the fabric. So just cut out 4 interfacing pieces, place those at the wrong side of the fabric near the center front seam, making sure not to put the interfacing in any of the seam allowance. I'm using a press cloth and then ironing that on until it is fused with the fabric. Now we're going to add the separating zipper to the center back seam. So first I'm going to unzip my zipper and prep it for installation. I'm going to press the top part of the zipper tape towards the back. And I'm just going to baste the zipper in about 1/4 inch from the edge. You want to make sure that you leave at least 1/2 inch on top and 1/2 inch on bottom for the zipper. You don't want your zipper to be longer than this, but it's okay if it's a little bit shorter. Now I'm going to place the lining on top of the shell, right sides together, and I'm going to pin around the entire perimeter. I'm going to sew around the entire perimeter as well, but leave those 2 side panels unsewn at the hem so we can flip it right side out later. Another way to finish the hem is actually to leave the bottom completely unsewn, and then after everything's flipped right side out, to use bias tape to finish the hem. This is normally what I do with corsets, so again, I will link a video at the top of the screen and down below if you want to see how to finish with bias tape. So like I said, I'm just going to sew around the entire perimeter of that corset, just leaving open the 2 side panels. Now once I'm done sewing, I'm going to clip the corners and trim around the entire seam allowance. However, I'm not going to trim the seam allowance where the zipper is, and I'm also not going to trim the seam allowance where we left the gap. So I'm going to trim the hem seam allowance except for where the gap is. When I reach the gap, I'm just going to cut off of the seam allowance. I just want to leave that seam allowance there at the gap because it'll be easier to press and top stitch closed later on. Now I'm just going to turn the corset right side out, make sure the corners are nice and crisp, and then I'm going to bring it over to my ironing board and just iron around the entire perimeter, making sure that the area where the gap is nice and crisp as well. Now I'm going to bring it over to my sewing machine and top stitch around the entire perimeter of the corset. This is also the stitch that is going to close up that gap we left earlier, so make sure you catch the seam allowance there. But I'm just going to sew about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge all the way around the corset, and this is just going to make everything look really nice and clean. Now we're going to insert the eyelets in the corset. So first off, I just like to figure out how many eyelets I want to use. It really just depends on what I'm feeling, but usually I like them about 1 inch apart. So my suggestion would just be to figure that out first. Then I'm going to take my ruler, draw a line 1/4 inch away from the edge of the corset, and then draw lines about 1 inch apart. I'm going to use my eyelet pliers to make holes at all of the intersections of those lines that I just created. And then I'm also going to use those eyelet pliers to insert the eyelets. This eyelet plier has changed my life. I will definitely link it down below if y'all are interested. Now moving on to the sleeves and straps, I'm just going to take the shell and lining piece of each and place them right side together, and then sew along the long edges, leaving the short edges unsewn. Then I'm going to flip each one right side out and give it a good press. And then by each short edge, I'm just going to tuck in the ends about 1/2 inch, and again, give it a good press just so everything looks super clean. Then I'm going to bring it over to the sewing machine and top stitch around the entire piece. I'm top stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Then I'm just going to pin the straps and sleeves in place. You can place the front of the straps and sleeves at the front notch and the back of the straps and sleeves right above where the center and side back panels meet. However, I highly recommend that you actually lace up the corset and put that on first before sewing on the straps and sleeves, because everybody's body is different and you may need to place the straps and sleeves in slightly different positions based on your body. Once you pin it, then you can just top stitch the straps to the corset and then top stitch the sleeves to the corset right over that previous top stitching. Lastly, I'm just going to use a ribbon to create the lace up closure, and then after that, you are done with your corset. Alright, so that's how you sew this crisscross corset top. Let me know which one you like better, the jean one or the pink jean one. And remember, the link to the pattern is that first link down below. And don't forget to use the discount code crisscross for 30% off until tomorrow at midnight. Also, don't forget that all of the equipment I used throughout this video is linked in the video description. And yeah, if you like this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up because it's the easiest way to support your favorite creators for free. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is Kiana Bonollo. Make sure you subscribe, turn that notification bell on so you don't miss out on those discounts in the future. But yeah, I think that's everything. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.